Hype man, Raj Nation, the GOAT to market. From Hype HQ in Chicago, Illinois, Startup Hype Man presents the GOAT to Market Show. What's up, everyone? I am your host, Raj Nation, the founder and chief pitch artist of Startup Hype Man. This podcast is where we bring you founders, company leaders, and creatives who are building it, who are doing it, who have been there and done that. And they pull back the curtain on their go-to-market strategies so that you can build a venture that you love and become the GOAT of your industry. Want first listen on episodes before anyone else? Subscribe to our newsletter at startuphypeman.com. You will get alerts every Sunday morning when we release new episodes. All right, let's hear how today's guest is becoming the GOAT. Ladies and gentlemen, making her way to the microphone from Los Angeles, California, she is the CMO of Mindtrip and the author of Grow Up, Take Your Startup to the Next Level. Please welcome Michelle Denogean.
Thank you, Raj. I love that, by the way. I love that you do that. If you could just follow me everywhere, every time I walk into a room with that would be amazing.
What you can do is we'll give you that section of the podcast as its own little slice. You can just hit play every time you walk into a room if I can't be there with you in person.
Sweet. I'm going to record that on my phone, and when I walk in, I'm just going to hit play.
Like I mentioned, she is Michelle Denogean, the CMO of an early stage startup called Mindtrip. She's got a long track record working in and around startups. Her last company she was at was she helped take the company from 15 employees all the way up to 200. The company was called Roadster. They ended up getting acquired for nearly $400 million by the largest player in their industry in automotives. She has a whole track record of accomplishments to her name. She's a sought-after speaker. She's now an author as well, like I mentioned, with the book Grow Up. So I'm super excited to have Michelle on today in the season finale of the GTM show. And we're covering a topic that I think every founder should be aware of. Once I became familiar with this topic through Michelle's work, I was really intrigued by it. And I've got a whole lot of questions I want to ask her. But today our topic is the 4 superpowers of a successful founder. Michelle, once again, welcome to the show. Why is this on your mind? Why is it important to you?
Yeah, thanks, Raj. I've spent the last few decades working in the startup world, as you had mentioned. Everything from, early stage seed round, which is where Mindtrip sits today, all the way to Series D and beyond. Some have been wildly successful, while others have not. And I think as a CMO, I'm just naturally a student of people. And so for me, while, I've observed all of these traits that make people really great at building companies, and I've also observed where they get stuck in the process. So this really came down to, how do I help founders become the leaders they need to be to have the right mix of people in their midst? So just to put a little fine point on that, I think it's very well known that, most startups don't survive. I wish that wasn't true, but only about 10% of them do. And really, when you peel back the onion, there was actually a study in 2021 that CB Insights did that talked about, what are the top reasons that startups fail? And it's the things you would think: lack of cash, no market need, being outcompeted. And these all may seem very obvious, but when you peel back the onion and ask the question, like, what does it take to do those things? It's really about the people. People really are the cure, in my mind, to startup failure. And so we'll talk a little bit about it. It's the basis of my book. And it's really based on one simple truth, which is what makes a founder great at starting their company is not going to be what makes them great at growing their company. So, to answer your question, like, why is it important to me? It's because I love the startup world. I've made it my mission to help as many founders, as many entrepreneurs as possible. And this book is the culmination of that.
What I find really interesting is that you're able to, for the most part, write about this from the perspective of observation. Like you've had a long track record of being a CMO, being a VP, being around like product owner, all that kind of thing. And I feel like a lot of times it is the founder themselves kind of writing about their own personal experience, but which is valid and everything. But I think what that fails to capture is what others might experience. And they have their own lived experience, their own point of view, but it's not as easy to especially, I think a great example would be the Bonobos founder. Great story, right? His book Burn Rate. And I'm not saying anything bad about him or the book. It's a great book, great person. But it's hard for him to share what's happening outside of what he was so intently focused on for so many years. Whereas in your case, like you're writing this after like literally decades of experience in the game and being able to work alongside so many different types of founders and CEOs. So I think that's a refreshing take.
Thank you. I think the other thing that happens often is people write from an educational standpoint. Like I'm a professor. I haven't been in the game for a really long time. And I think it's the other important part is I'm still in the game. I'm still in an operating role. I still live this. I eat my own dog food, right? Like this isn't something that I observed, 20 years ago and am now writing about. It is a current situation that I see every day.
Yeah. So let's learn a little bit more about you before we get into talking about the main topic. When you were young, what did you want to be when you grow up or when you grew up?
Yeah, that's a great question. And probably not a surprise that I wanted to be an author. That was, since I was a teenager, that was definitely on the radar. I was a creative at heart. My father was very much a businessman. And early on, I was like not interested in business. I'm on the creative side. I'm a writer. I'm going to do that. And I just got sucked into it later on in my life, which has been very rewarding, but not really what I was thinking in the beginning. I actually had a teaching assistant when I was in college, when they heard that I wanted to be an author, say, "Oh, you can't do that unless you do that full time." And so 30 years later, I'm here to prove him wrong that I actually accomplished it. But that was really it. I was definitely all about creativity and writing and, wanting to be on that side of the house. And as I matured and got more seasoned, I like the word seasoned than old, in my career, I realized, wow, I have so much to give. And to be honest, one of the pinpoints or the changes that happened in my life was when the internet came out, which probably does now make me sound like a dinosaur. But it was that moment where I was like, ooh, all of these people starting these companies are going to need like a business foundation. So for the first time, instead of running after the creative side, I went to business school and said, I'm going to go really understand what it takes to grow a company so that I can help these companies. And I think about that often now that I'm really in the startup world, because that was the beginning of that trajectory that happened over the next couple years after that. Yeah. The cup of coffee I had after that.
You mentioned that kind of that inflection point of the arrival and then the prominence of the internet. That actually leads into the next question I was going to ask you, which is you have so much good experience at so many different companies over like 2 to 3 different like major technology inflection points, I would say. Like there's internet.com era, but pre-social media. There's social media 1.0, which is, your MySpace through Facebook. And I would even call like, up to like Instagram and all that stuff. And then now into like 2.0, which is the TikTok generation and beyond. And then now AI and all that stuff. Obviously, there have been technological changes over that time, but I'm curious if you look at that timeline, what's the thing or things that really surprised you and how they changed? And what is the thing or things that have just, the more things change, the more they stay the same?
Yeah, that's a great question. I think as more and more capabilities came online. And I think of this in the marketing world, right? Just the distribution channels, because that's when you're talking about social and you're talking about the internet, and then you could throw mobile in there, what's happening in AI, which is the world I live in now, right? Like all of those things have just created more and more opportunities, but it also has created more and more complexity for companies and for marketing teams in particular to think about how do I distribute, how do I live in this world where the attention span is so distributed. There's so many channels, there's so many ways, they talk about how long people's attention span is now versus what it was back then. So I think that is, as technology has come on, I think it has distributed and created complexities in how companies can reach their audiences, but it's also created amazing efficiencies in our lives, right? I remember my mother actually at one point, and she'll kill me that this is actually public now, but I'm going to say it anyways. She went online during the internet, printed something out from a website and mailed it to me. And I remember getting that in the mail going, Mom, what did you just do? Like, this is the internet. You can copy that link and like send. So the efficiency gains
like
is what I'm saying.
Oh, wow.
She put it in the mail and literally like I got it 2 days later instead of 30 seconds later or 5 seconds later, whatever that transmission time was at the time. And so I think there's been great efficiencies. I think it's added complexity to the distribution. But what I will say has not changed, the thing that has not changed out of everything across the time is the need to have the right team by your side to get through all of those changes. Culture, team, people, like that has not changed in any shape or form, even though everything around you has. Like how you actually bring a team together to make magic has not changed.
So with the book that's coming out, and actually by the time this releases, when is the release date? Sorry.
Well, it is submitted to Amazon, so we can ask Amazon.
Sure. Okay. All right. Maybe by the time this episode is out, it'll be out.
By the time the episode is out, it should be out. Yes.
Okay. So with this book, it's a pretty interesting title, right? Grow Up is almost like it's a little bit of a challenger type of title. How did you come up with that as the name?
Yeah. For me, it was a play on startup. Naturally, it was really, how do we take a very, very common word, how we classify all of these companies from one person in their garage to, pre-IPO, right? We talk about startups in that way, and really put a pin in how do you get from that phase to actually scaling the company to grow up. And so it's really just a play on the term startup, talking about how do you get from a startup to a grow up.
With that sort of in mind, let's talk through one. There's a lot that you cover in the book, but I want to focus today's conversation on it's near the beginning, and it's about this concept of the 4 superpowers of a successful founder. We're going to get into each one of those, but first I want to know, I think everyone can think of a superpower in a different way. How are you defining superpower?
Yeah, I define superpower as the one thing that you do best that makes you great at what you do. It's the one quality that makes you great. That is what your superpower is, in my mind.
One quality that makes you great at what you do. Okay, so the one quality that makes you great at what you do, but there are 4 categories you found, or 4 types of greatness, if you will. Let's walk through each one of those. So the first one is the power to innovate. Talk about that.
Yeah. So the power to innovate is really around the ability to find a really big problem that needs to be solved and to gain conviction around that, to have product market fit for what that is, that knowing that whatever your customer target is, they feel like that is a big enough problem to solve in order to pay for. So that to me is, you're solving problems, and whether they know it's a problem or not right now, the key is that is your superpower. You have the ability to understand the problems in your target audience and find a great solution in order to solve that problem.
So through the lens of the really big problem and gaining the conviction behind that, what are like what goes in conjunction with that? What are the characteristics that kind of person would have? Or like, what are the character traits you could spot and be like, oh, they're an innovator?
Yeah, they're inquisitive. They think outside the box. I think they are having conversations ongoingly with potential customers so that they can understand the world that they live in and unpack that. They're also not afraid to take risks. They are wanting to move fast, right? And they're very inspiring because it's pretty mission driven when you find a problem that is really a point of hurt for somebody. And you're able to rally people around you in order to solve that problem.
Yeah. So I would say thinking outside the box, taking risks. I think any founder is going to associate themselves. They're going to self-assess and say, well, I take risks. I think outside the box. What's more like discerning about this group versus others though?
Yeah, I do. I think you're right, actually. In most people, before they actually dig in and evaluate, will think of themselves that way, because I think startups tend to associate with some kind of, new opportunity that they've come to market. I think it's important, though, to understand that some of these, qualities of solving a problem doesn't mean that you are really in the weeds and in the nuance of being the person that is the solution driver for that problem. So you might start a company that is very innovative, but it might not be you in that seat. And that's okay, actually. That's okay for it to not be you in that seat. You might have a co-founder, or, depending on the stage, you might have a head of product that is playing that role. And therefore your company is very innovative in that way. So an example of that would be, another one of the superpowers is being a builder. A builder is somebody that gathers teams, analyzes data, really helps the company ramp up. And you might be that type of founder that is really good at bringing teams together and hiring and raising money, right? And you have a co-founder that is the solution-oriented problem solver person. So it doesn't mean that your company isn't innovative or that you don't have, traits in that way. It just means that you have another superpower that is more oriented to you, but your whole company could be innovative. Does that make sense?
Definitely.
Yeah.
So if we think about this, this whole like finding a big problem and gaining conviction behind it, one of the ways that any founder can do that is not just through the problem that's there, but you're going to gain conviction the more the product you develop actually backs up what it is that you're saying. And so if you're a founder right now who's not so much technical and you are that more visionary type, you're going to need a partner for software development. And the right partner for you is not just any partner. It's not just a good partner. It's the GOAT of software development, and that is Akeva. I personally have talked to a lot of founders who just get screwed over by offshore or budget dev shops. And the challenge that they end up encountering, which they don't realize at the time, is they get something at a really low rate, but they're just getting order takers. And if you're not a technical founder yourself, you may not know the right quote unquote orders to give. Not only are those shops order takers, they also really just get by doing the bare minimum. And that means on your side, on the other end, you oftentimes get software that just has like glaring holes and errors in it, or being forced to pay hidden release fees just to claim ownership of your code. And then there's Akeva. They build strategically for scale from day one. They help you make product decisions, and they give you full ownership of your code by default. And they've got a killer offer for you. It's a you call it code review. Only a GOAT would do this. The you call it code review. What is that? Well, They're going to review the most critical parts of your code if you qualify, so that you can see exactly what your tech needs to launch or scale. They will do this code review completely free. And then you call it from there. So remember back in college, being at the bar on a Wednesday night, it was like $1 you call it, but those you call it were usually like the bottom shelf of liquor that was available, and you might spit it out after drinking it. This is the upside of a you call it. It's the much more tasteful one. Basically, they'll do the code review, and then you decide, you call it. Do you want to take their advice and then handle things on your own? You call it. Do you want to take it somewhere else? You call it. Do you want Akeva's development help to do it? You call it. The power is in your hands. Nobody else on the market offers this. So if you're ready for a you call it code review, if you're ready to see if you qualify, if you are ready to get goated, just head to akeva.io. That's AKAVA.io, akeva.io, and tell them Startup Hype Man sent you. So Michelle, as we talk about the 4 superpowers, number 1 is the power to innovate. Number 2 is the power to connect. Let's talk about this now.
Yeah. So the power to connect is really about the person in your company that owns the reputation. So this person is the relationship person that's going to be out there really connecting with other people in the industry and bringing what you do to life. And so as an example, this is the person that is highly networked in your space. Typically, they seem to know everybody, or they know somebody that knows somebody, right? The connector is the person that is going to go out and do your thought leadership for your company. They're going to be a spokesperson. And they're also going to be really focused on how do we make sure we're delivering a consistent message out to the industry at large, whether the customer is currently with you as an official customer or potential, like just the whole industry and how you represent yourself there.
If we think about like celebrity entrepreneurs or just like generally famous entrepreneurs that are out there, is there anyone in particular that you would identify as a connector?
Yeah, I mean, I would think that somebody like Walt Disney is a great connector. If you think about the consistency and the storytelling that he had done over time, that makes everything you think about Disney resonate in the same way. People have a very particular understanding of what Disney is and what it means, whether you've been to Disneyland or any of the Disney properties or not. And so that would be a great example of somebody who really connects with their audience. And also there's lots of stories in his history of how he connected with customers and how, reaching out one-on-one. And you've probably seen photos of him, with children and others over time. So I think that would be a good example. I think another example from a connector standpoint would be, somebody that I personally worked with, a guy by the name of Guy, actually, Guy Gal. He was at the last company I was with.
Guy Gal is the name.
Guy Gal is the name, yes. He is the CEO at a company called Side. And he's an amazing connector, just has the ability, the natural innate ability to connect with his audience in a way that I have not seen before. I've followed him down hallways. People come up to him. He remembers what their last vacation was and how old their kids were. Like, that's the true power of connection, is when you can actually have those types of relationships that go beyond just transactional for the company that you work in.
Coming back to Disney for a moment, I just learned of this story in the last week or so, and that is that Walt did, so to your point of like the ability to connect with customers, and earlier on in our conversation, you talked about how people and culture are two things that should always withstand the test of time. One of the things that Walt Disney did from a culture standpoint, but also now through the lens you just identified of being a connector, was part of their training manual. And I don't know if they still do it, but at least, in the first X decades of Disney's amusement park, what was in the training manual for park employees was the ones who were parking lot staff. They were told in the training manual, when a car pulls up, identify the license plate first, so you know what state they're driving in from. When they open the door, you are first going to greet their kids and tell them what an amazing time they're going to have. Then you will greet the parents. And when you greet the parents, you will ask them about the drive in from wherever. And that was his way, and therefore the company's way of making those people feel welcomed right away. Because if like you're that parent driving, you know, a 6 and a 9-year-old or a 4 and an 8-year-old to Disney, and you're coming all the way from, I don't know, Illinois, you probably are ready to like murder your kids by the time you get there. And so if that employee can then put a smile on the kid's face right away, what's that going to do to the parents? It's going to give them such a sense of relief too. And then there's that connection component.
Yeah, I agree with that. The other thing they do is they call everybody a guest, not a customer. So, you know, you are my guest, you know, that philosophy of how do I make people feel special is just ingrained. But you're right, it's all in the training so that they can have that consistent experience. And consistency is a key piece of what a connector does naturally. Honestly, they don't even have to strive for it. They just understand how important consistency actually is.
I want to come back to that point in a little bit, but first, let's go over to the next superpower, which is the power to build. What is this all about?
Yeah, so the power to build is looking at people in the way of who is really, really great at process and data and analysis at your company, right? Who is that person? Because that person is going to be the person that helps you ramp up. They're going to help you grow the company. They're going to help you hire people, know when to hire people. They're also going to be the person that helps you raise money. And that's really important because they're going to have all the data to show why somebody should invest in your company. And as you remember, that is one of the reasons that gets quoted often for why startups fail, is that they just run out of funding. And so to have somebody in your court that is looking at the data, that understands and can tell a compelling story in that way is really important to have amongst your team. And so that builder is a very important part of the team.
So is it fair to say that the builder is the numbers person?
The builder is the numbers person. Yeah.
Okay. Is it possible to, you know, be a connector, but also be good with numbers? Or is it kind of like you're in your corner?
Yeah, it is possible to be a bridge, you know, between a couple and have some of those tendencies. I think with any test that you take, with any quiz like that, where you're trying to identify, there's always those fringe cases where you're so close to one or the other. I do think, though, that when people really think about their superpower, there's a primary and there's a secondary, just like there would be in any personality test that you take, right? If you take the disc profile, you might be like me, like very close to the center and, you know, playing in all of the different sectors. So it is definitely possible to have some of those strengths in other superpowers as well.
Yeah. The fourth superpower is the power to persuade. Now, it seems pretty obvious just based on the name alone, but I'm sure there's a little bit more beneath the surface of that.
Yeah. So the power to persuade is all about winning customers. And it is different than some of the other superpowers in that this person is a numbers person, but they are a numbers person to a means to an end. Right? They are all about relationships, but it's a means to an end. So for the persuader, they're very, very good at connecting with you and getting you to understand why this product or service is the right product or service for you. So to your point, persuasion, the power to be persuasive and to be able to convince people that this is the right time or the right place for you is a really important element of your company.
What would you say then is the difference between the persuader and the connector?
Yep. So the connector is about relationships, but their relationships are not connected to necessarily always winning customers. They're not going to be the ones that, you know, sign the dotted line. They are going to be the ones out in the industry connecting in more of a thought leadership way.
Interesting. Okay. So the persuader is it fair to say more like calculated in the relationships they develop?
Yeah, I don't want to make it sound in a negative way.
Not in
It's
like a
actually,
sinister way, but
yeah, not a sinister way, but they definitely are goal oriented.
yeah, maybe more discerning over how they'll spend their time.
Correct. Yes.
Okay. Okay. So across connection, persuasion, building, and innovating, a lot of this does have to do with storytelling at the end of the day, regardless of which corner you're in, whether it's a story with numbers, whether it's the story of being able to get your first few customers, whether it's the story of getting stakeholders in the industry, or the story of getting that person to sign on the dotted line. One of the greatest ways you can tell stories consistently is through marketing automation and the newsletters that you choose to send out. Now, me personally, the way I've been going about that is through newsletters for over a decade. But I really like that after over a decade, I dropped MailChimp and decided to pick up ActiveCampaign instead. And I have personally experienced ActiveCampaign being the GOAT of marketing automation. Now, Startup Hype Man, service-based company. But whether you're a company like mine, whether you are a B2B SaaS or a marketplace or a consumer app or really anything in between, every kind of business needs and can and should benefit from a newsletter. For me, it's been such an easier process to develop and distribute my newsletter on a weekly or sometimes more basis using ActiveCampaign versus what I was previously on. The integrations are all set up really well. There's automations that are made simple. I now actually have it set up so if someone books a sales meeting through Calendly, there's an automation that's triggered that automatically adds that person to my ActiveCampaign database. And then there's a tag that gets assigned to them. And then that tag has its own email sequence associated with it. And all of that is just done automatically. I also really love the customer support at ActiveCampaign. I had a question about an automation that I was doing the other day. Wasn't sure if I was doing it right. Someone responded to me on chat like maybe within 45 seconds, and the whole thing was resolved in 3.5 or 4 minutes. So love everything that ActiveCampaign has brought to Startup Hype Man. We've been able to have a better marketing presence as a result. And if you're someone who's going from a different provider right now, and you're like, I don't want to, I've got a lot of data in this one, I don't want to have to switch over. Honestly, that was my hesitation at the start. And then they made it so almost painfully easy. Basically, it was so easy doing the data migration that I had to ask them on 2 or 3 different occasions if there was more that I was supposed to do because I couldn't believe how simple it was. ActiveCampaign is out to help startups, and they've made their pricing even more affordable in the name of that. They now have plans that start at just $15 a month. So you can get started in building a community for yourself. Let's say you are a persuader. Let's say you are a connector or an innovator or even a builder. You can now start to put your gospel, quote unquote, the gospel of your startup out in front of your customer base, potential investors, stakeholders, partners, et cetera, with the likes of an ActiveCampaign. And you can get started for just $15 a month. And not only do you get it for $15 a month, you also get your first 2 weeks free. And if you want to activate that 2-week trial, hit the link in the episode description and you will get 2 weeks free courtesy of Startup Hype Man. Today on the Go-to-Market Show, we're talking with Michelle Denogean about the 4 superpowers of a successful founder. Now, we covered that those 4 superpowers are the power to innovate, the power to build, the power to connect, and the power to persuade. Having understood all of those, I actually want to know, like, what was your model in coming up with these? And I'm going to guess you weren't just like, let me just figure out 4 words that sound good. What was like the research process like? What did you base these 4 things off of?
Yeah. So first of all, it started with, these are not, it may sound in some ways like these are role-based, like, oh, the persuader might be in sales. What I realized was that not everybody is in the role that connects with their superpower. It's very easy to target somebody that is in a role and say, oh, they must be XYZ. So where we started with this model was traditionally with the Myers-Briggs, which is a very popular model, and just started to tweak some of the questions so that we could put it more in the lens of what it means to be a founder in the work environment than just the traditional, personality of your life. And so that model is the foundation. We built it on top, saw the results through lots of testing, and came out with, okay, in these clusters, what is it that this actually means? If you're this personality type, how does this translate into what you would be like as a founder? What is your superpower as a founder? So it has a base. It wasn't just from thin air. And we've been testing it amongst founders and extended leadership teams for the last few years.
I happen to have, before we sat down for this interview, I actually took the quiz that you've developed to figure out your superpower. I'm curious, based on our interaction so far and our interaction through email leading up to this, can you gather what superpower I am, or that I have?
I don't know if I know you well enough, Raj, to fully do that yet. So I don't want to guess wrong, but just based a little bit on your background, I would say you're somewhere. Yeah, I'm not even going to guess. Please tell me. I don't want to guess it wrong. I would need to spend a little bit more time with you to guess that.
Okay, fair enough. I actually had a tie in my score. So for everyone listening, in Michelle's book, she's got like a quiz you can take where you're answering a series of questions, and then you add up like your score in each of the columns and all that stuff. And then that assigns you to one of the 4 superpowers. And crazy enough, I scored a 17 in innovate, but also a 17 in connect.
So tied, straight across.
Straight tie.
Yeah.
And then persuade came in next at 9, and I think build was 7. I was surprised I was not persuader at the time, because it's all about like master storytelling, which is really like what I do. But I think hearing more about you talk about like the aspect of being a little bit more discerning over where you'll spend your time, sole customer focus, that kind of stuff, I think it made more sense to me that I'm connector type, because I spent a lot of my time building ecosystem level relationships and working with different partners. And also, admittedly, I can be much more discerning with my time. Like, I give someone 30 minutes, even if I know it's not going to tie at all to a sale that I'm trying to make.
Right. I would have actually guessed that, but I didn't want to do it because we didn't know each other well enough. But that is where I was going to guess. That is actually also, I'm not even like you. I'm not like the same number, but I'm also, I'm mostly connector with innovator. And I think you talking about like, wow, maybe I was a persuader, but now I understand it. I'll give you an example of how the connector operates differently from my own personal experience.
Yeah.
I would go to conferences and speak to the industry and connect with people, and I would know everything about you and your family and what was happening and your business and what you needed. And we'd have these really great conversations over a long period of time. And I wouldn't push you ever to like engage with my company and my product. The sales organization would come behind and talk to you, and they would pull me in because I had a relationship. And so I think that's a little bit of the difference is a lot of times the connector builds relationships that are way bigger than just that sort of means to an end perspective, which is very valuable. It's very valuable to every company to have a connector that knows everybody, but left to their own devices. Like if I ran sales holistically, that's all I did, I would probably not be the best person for that role because I would never close anybody. I just am a great connector and networker and love to be around people, right? So that's the nuanced difference. But I honestly did think that might be where you landed. I just didn't want to presume.
So I'll tell you what, like a lot of times when I take personality-based tests or read about like, I literally just finished reading a very, very small book on like, I'm a Sagittarius, and there's just a book on like Sagittarius and your tendencies. And I'm like, I'm reading, I'm like, yep, that's me. And I have a tendency to like just come away with only the good. So What might be the blind spots of someone who's an innovator and a connector?
Yeah, it's a great question, and I'm glad you brought it up because that is the foundations. Like, why even care what your superpower is? I mean, other than like me, I take a test and then I'm looking for all the negative pieces because that's just my general personality. Like, how do I fix that? How do I get better? But really, what it is to identify there's your superpower, but that every superpower, kind of like, I mean, not to be cheesy, but like a superhero, has a dark side. And there is something that you cannot see that is holding you back or holding your company back because you are that. And so I'll give you a great example. Maybe I'll tell a little story about an innovator. Like, what would an innovator do? What would their blind spot be? So if you're an innovator, like if that was what you did and you were, found a company, it's likely that you built a great product that solves an amazing problem that people had. And they initially, they love you. Your first customers probably loved you very much because they usually do when you're an innovator. But the more customers you have, the more feature requests you get. And sometimes at your company, if they haven't already, somebody will put process in place. And that process is typically the innovator's blind spot. So it's likely that you'll get frustrated because that does a couple things. When you see progress on the big, meaty projects that you truly care about slow down, then you're likely to do what great innovators do. They insert themselves back into the mix. They peel off, a group of people, and they're like, we're going to get stuff done, right? We're going to go and tackle this. And they totally disempowered the person that put process in place. They didn't recognize it. They kind of thought that was a little bit of red tape. And frankly, they don't even care in the moment because they're just trying to get stuff done. The problem with that is when they did that as an innovator, you've peeled off this team. Now you've got less people working on customer issues, the thing that the process of trying to tackle. And eventually everything kind of slows down and you're not able to see that maybe you need to hire more people because maybe you thought that, well, we used to be way more efficient. Why do we have to hire more people? So it's a little bit that innovator is really, really great at the big picture and the big meaty things. And then when somebody wants to slow them down because they love to move fast, that's a blind spot for them. And they could just say, we don't want any of this process or this red tape. And so for every good side, for every superpower, there is this blind spot. If you're not careful, it could really get in the way of having a successful business. In the story I was saying, that could lead to losing customers over time because you're no longer focused on resolving those customer issues at the speed that you need to, and then eventually get out competed, right? So those are just some of the things. The connector, like I said, I'm also a connector. The connector's blind spot is around empowering people. Connectors love control. They control the narrative, they control the message, they like to own the reputation. And so if you're not careful, a connector will not really give the team everything to. They'll hold on too long, too tight. And so that's the negative there that you have to overcome, which is how do I make sure that I'm not owning everything, that I don't have the control so tight that I've completely disempowered my team in actually getting things done. And to be honest, a lot of times you may already have the other superpowers on your team and you're just stopping them from doing their job.
Very interesting. There's a couple things you mentioned in both of those that I was like, struggled with that before. Yes, it sounds familiar. Interestingly though, I mentioned earlier, I wanted to come back to the point of consistency because you said connectors have like a certain amount of, they are very consistent in like their message and whatever they put out there. One of the ways I really identify that is like, I kind of go out of my way to make sure the Startup Hype Man brand is consistent. This is down to, here's just one example of this. When we switched over to Active Campaign, I noticed that they have a feature where you can edit the color of hyperlinks in the emails you're sending out. Immediately, I was like, we are changing all the hyperlinks in our newsletters to the Hype Man blue color. zero, the
Yep.
color code 00BFFF or whatever it is. That's the color. Like anytime I see a hyperlink, and I tell it, we have different team members who are responsible for different aspects of our newsletter. And I'm like, anytime I see a hyperlink, it has to be that blue. I don't want to see any other color.
Yep. Connectors love marketing automation, by the way, because they can put it in and guarantee it's the same every time it gets sent. Builders also like marketing automation because it's efficient.
Yes,
so
it's
it's
very
interesting.
saying that, yeah. The other realm, or one other realm that I'll do this in, this was from the very start or very early on. Most people, when they receive an invoice, it says some language on there like, please pay this within X number of days. Thank you for your business. I changed the language so all of our invoices, it says, yo, 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 it's time for the hype man to collect that dough. And you already know, so don't delay with the scroll. The idea in my mind being like, that's like, where is everywhere we can be consistent with the brand that we put out. And also I was like, you know what, maybe it's an innovation tendency on this other side of it, but like, how can I make paying for something feel a little bit more fun than it ever has been before? Because nobody likes the act of giving money away.
Yeah. And that's your brand, right? So 1,000%. I totally understand what you're saying. And I'm glad that it resonated with you.
You're putting a lot of this into context for me. Thank you for this therapy session.
Anytime.
Okay, so we've covered the superpowers, we've covered the blind spots. Any recommendations for how you can, like, if you are a builder, you're probably going to want to hire or add team members in the other categories, but like, you're probably also thinking about hiring through the lens of being a builder. So anything in like the hiring and interview process that if you have one superpower that you can be conscious of to make sure you're not just hiring more of yourself.
Yeah, yes. So a couple things on that front. One, you didn't ask this question, but I'm going to ask it and answer it myself,
sure.
Which is, how do you identify your blind spot? Because I think that's an important piece that everybody needs to get in touch with. And we only talked about 2 of the 4 superpowers, but the thing to think about is, what is the one thing that you hate doing at all costs? Like, what is the thing that falls to the bottom of your list, right? Is it putting process in place? Is it, I know I need to write that piece, but I'm going to do that tomorrow. Like, if you really think about what is the thing that is at the very, very bottom of your list, that's usually where your blind spot sits, the thing that you hate doing. And so you need to be aware of that, because when you are hiring a team, the best teams are balanced. The best teams have all 4 superpowers. We talked about founders and the 4 superpowers, but the truth is it's about building a team with all 4. And so you don't want to get into a situation where you hire a lot of, clones of, the same superpower, where your whole team is connectors, as an example, because you'll never sell anything. I said that a minute ago. You won't sell anything. Sure. And so I think that's the key. That's like the ticket, which is to be very conscious of not just what your superpower is, be conscious of your blind spot, understand what it is, and you need to come to terms with how to appreciate that you need that. And then make sure that when you're hiring people, that you are identifying their superpowers, so you can have a diversity of the superpowers on your team. Each of them is needed in order to grow.
Now, we've talked about this through the lens of founders, but I just want to confirm, it does sound like really anyone could take this quiz and anyone could identify with one of their superpowers. It's kind of like how it's their work style. Yeah.
Correct.
Okay. What would you say is like, if someone's going to just like, we covered a lot, but if they're going to take like one thing away, and they're like, what is something you want someone to walk away with on how they can leverage the superpowers?
Yeah. Don't try to build a team without understanding your blind spot. The superpowers themselves are going to just tell you what you're great at, but understanding what your blind spot is going to be the ticket to unlocking all of the abilities to scale your company. because you're either doing one of two things. If you aren't in perfect shape, if you don't have a very well balanced team with all of these different core competencies, then you are going to either need to hire them, or you might have that person in your midst and you might be sabotaging them. So you have to really come to terms with, why is it that you hate process? Maybe there's value to it, as an example. And once you do that, I think that is the most critical piece. And then figure out how do I make sure I build a team around me that is going to balance that out.
Let's go to our wrap up now. First question I have for you is just, where can our listeners find the book? Where can they find you? Where can they learn more?
Yeah. So Amazon, it will be available hopefully by the time we air this episode. You're sort of beholden to Amazon. I don't know if people know this about books, but you submit it and then you're waiting. So it will hopefully be available on Amazon. If not, you can go to my website, michelledenogean.com. It's nice to have a very unique last name. You can own your own domain, and you can actually sign up for my newsletter there. I'll be notifying people when it becomes available. You can also take the Superpower quiz on my website. So anybody for free can just take the quiz and understand what their superpower is as they're thinking about the blind spots and how do I actually create an effective team for myself.
Denogean is Denogeane, if you were trying to do that phonetically. Michelle, who is one person you want to give a shout out to who's been instrumental in your professional journey?
Yeah, I would say it's now my two-time CEO, because he was CEO at Roadster, now also the CEO at Mindtrip, Andy Moss. He is the one who years ago told me that I'm way more than the chief marketing officer, just in my ability to see what's happening organizationally at a company. And so that was very evolutionary for me to think about myself beyond the marketing seat. And so I would definitely give him a shout out today.
We'll now do our top one or two lessons or takeaways for the listeners based on the discussion today. I'll go first and I'll toss it to you. The conversation today was about the 4 superpowers of a successful founder. There's a lot of directions I could go with this, but I think what I really want people to walk away with is understanding your superpower is the start of the process. It does not end there. You use that as the building block to learn more about yourself and therefore do better for your company. Michelle, top one or two lessons or takeaways.
I would say, sometimes this sort of self-awareness, self-discovery can be confronting, but know that your superpower is what made you great at starting your company. And that's something to be really proud of. Every founder, every entrepreneur should be proud of that. I'm always awed and inspired by founders that start companies that take the risk to put it out on the line and do something new. But you also, as you grow, need to recognize that what made you great at starting is not going to be what makes you great at growing. And that's okay. There's nothing wrong with that. That is par for the course. Any successful entrepreneur would tell you that is what they all go through, right? They have to evolve. And just to keep in mind that all of that, ability to take risks and be innovative and do all those things at the beginning needs to stay present throughout. You need to keep an open mind and keep pivoting your own capabilities and who you have around you.
My final question, which is how we end every episode on this show. Now, you have had a director's chair view of a lot of different founders. So the question is, Michelle, fill in the blank. Entrepreneurship is blank.
Solving big problems and being comfortable with the unknown.
Well said. She is Michelle Denogean, the multi-time CMO, current CMO at Mindtrip, an author of the new book, Grow Up, Take Your Startup to the Next Level. And if you had any questions for Michelle as you were listening to this and you were like, ooh, that's interesting, I really want to ask her about this, but maybe you were driving while listening to this, or maybe you were at the gym and you didn't have a notebook by you, or you just weren't in front of Michelle like I am, I've got good news for you because Michelle's hopping into GTM Club and doing an Ask Me Anything the whole first week that this episode is live. It'll be a Reddit style Ask Me Anything. So you just pop in, you drop a question for her, and she will answer for you during that week. It all happens inside of Goat to Market Club. That's our online founder and GTM leader community. It's totally free to join and to access. You can do so at startuphypeman.com/GTM-club, startuphypeman.com/GTM-club. We will see you there with Michelle for the Ask Me Anything or the podcast after party, whichever way you want to look at it. That concludes season 3 of the Goat to Market show. Michelle, thank you so much for being on our season finale, and I'm so excited to dive into the rest of your book.
Thank you. It was amazing being on, and I appreciate the audience for listening and look forward to hearing from everybody.
That'll put a bow on this one. Before we head out of here, a couple quick housekeeping items. Number 1, did you like what you heard? Well, give us a subscribe and a follow. Maybe share it with one friend who you think would find this valuable. Number 2, remember that Ask Me Anything I told you about at the end of the episode? That goes down exclusively inside of Goat to Market Club, our online founder and startup community, and you can access it for free. Your membership is 100% free at startuphypeman.com/GTM-club. Number 3, need pitch help? Startup Hype Man is your man. Whether it's a fundraising narrative or a go-to-market or category narrative, we've got you covered to make sure you have messaging that doesn't help you just go to market, but of course, what? Helps you become the GOAT to market. All right, we will see you next week here on the Goat to Market show. Thank you for listening. And remember, why be a unicorn when you can be the GOAT?